Has watching anime ever made you fall in love with Japan? Have images of summer festivals and cherry blossoms made you want to visit or even move here? Of course, it's happened to all of us. A lot of the anime that we watch has a great way of highlighting Japan's charm, but there are some anime that paint a more realistic picture of Japanese culture. And that's what we're going to focus on today on Kouga. Konnichiwa, snitches. I'm B. This is Kouga, and I am loving my new Yoko Karama mug that I got from the Tokyo Jump Shop in Tokyo Station. It's great. Everybody knows how much I love Yu Yu Hakusho and Karama in particular. So today's topic. I was browsing through YouTube one day when I came across this video that listed 10 ways that Japan is 10 years ahead of the rest of the world. Now, this guy was just a tourist, and many of the topics that he discussed were related to technology, and they were all valid. I mean, future toilets, paying for food with your train pass, arcade skyscrapers, and immaculate public transportation. They're all great, and they're all huge reasons why I love it here so much. However, these are all matters of convenience, and convenience doesn't always equal progress. In fact, depending on who you ask, i.e. actual Japanese people, Japan has certain aspects of its culture that they feel places it 30 to 40 years behind the rest of the world. Now, I've been living and working in Japan full-time for a year now, after visiting on and off for 3 months at a time for a year and a half. And while that's still a relatively short amount of time, it's still enough to say that some of the smudges on this pretty picture that we paint of Japan have started to show. And being aware of these things, I started to notice more frequently how some of these flaws are portrayed in anime. Now, people in Japan typically aren't anywhere close to being as socially or politically outspoken as America or other countries, but every so often you'll find social or political commentary thrown into different forms of Japanese media that call attention to serious issues, sometimes subtly, sometimes very forthright. Now, there are quite a few of these issues, such as gender inequality and work culture, that anime either speaks out against or outright reinforces. And I hope to discuss more on these topics in the future, but today I'll be talking about some anime that address and criticize a specific part of Japanese culture that we often don't notice in anime or even realize exists, and that's the very real issue of bullying in Japan. Now, before I get started, I just want to emphasize that this is in no way meant to be a hit piece on Japan. I live here, I love it here. For me personally, the good outweighs the bad exponentially. It has those endearing quirks that make you love it a little more each day. But there's one thing that a lot of people do, and I've been guilty of it myself, is we see the side of Japan that's marketed to us, and we romanticize it as a perfect cartoonish utopia that just has everything figured out, which simply just is not the case. And the danger of this view is that for some foreigners who have moved here in the past, they find themselves confronted with the realities of everyday life in Japan, and it completely obliterates their preconceived notion of what it would be like to live here. Now, some of the customs and the cultural norms just simply don't jibe with their personality, and they quickly find themselves on a return trip back to their home country. So I think taking a realistic view on these things helps with understanding that no place is perfect. Not Japan, certainly not America, not anywhere. And going in with a more informed impression of life here will make for a better experience should you decide to move to Japan in the future. So, sorry for the long intro, let's get into the anime. So the first one I want to talk about is Aura, Kouga Maryuin's Last War. Now, among all the slice of life school anime that we've come to enjoy, where the girl is secretly pining after the male classmate of her dreams, or vice versa, Aura focuses on what's really happening in schools in Japan by taking an unabashed look at the epidemic of bullying. Of course, there's bullying all over the world, but Japan's bullying issue is a particularly unique one because of the way that it's carried out. Along with other movies like A Silent Voice, Aura is an anime film that takes one of the most honest looks at this phenomenon without sugarcoating the issue. And the issue is really a cultural one. See, modern Japanese culture is rooted in a form of collectivism that reinforces uniformity disguised as unity. Now, Japan is an incredibly clean, safe, and peaceful society, but it comes at a high cost of individuality. There's a Japanese saying that's pretty well known to many foreigners who find themselves having trouble coping with the homogeneous nature of its society, and it goes, "The nail that sticks out gets hammered down." And this philosophy apparently is put into practice very early, as seen in Aura. So this anime is about a young high school student named Ichiro Sato, who had a wild imagination in middle school, always pretending that he was a hero named Maryuin Kouga. And it was this eccentric behavior that made him an easy and frequent target for bullying. From all the bullying and hammering that he received from being that nail that stuck out just a little too much, Ichiro tries to put that life behind him in an effort to live a normal life in high school. So now Ichiro is doing his best to not stand out and live a peaceful life by blending in, which again comes at the high cost of his individuality. Unfortunately, though, for Ichiro, his teacher assigns him to look after a female classmate named Ryoko, whose personality is very similar to what his once was, as she also likes to fantasize about being someone else and has her own delusions of grandeur as well. So Ichiro rejects the notion of befriending her, as it opens just way too many wounds of his own past and the pain and suffering that his entire family endured as a result of it. And the chances of that past being exposed to his new classmates is just too much for Ichiro. In fact, upon seeing how similar Ryoko is to Ichiro, his own sister even orders the girl to stay away from him after learning about her and seeing how badly she has been bullied. So Japanese kids can find themselves the targets of bullying for being the slightest bit different from the group. In America, a bully victim is typically targeted by 1 to 3 people, whereas in Japan it is not at all uncommon for a child to be targeted by the entire class, and teachers are notorious for being either unable or flat out unwilling to do anything to remedy the situation. Bullying can range from physical assault to constant verbal abuse to even being completely shunned by literally everyone. In fact, 80% of bullying among school students in Japan qualifies as collective violence, meaning it's the entire classroom against a single victim. And 90% of these cases are considered ongoing, lasting more than a week. And despite their efforts, the Japanese government has just been pretty ineffective in trying to fix the epidemic, which is especially sad when you take into account Japan's suicide issue. And this is also addressed in Aura. So the bullying of Ryoko intensifies all the way up to the point where she wants to leave this world and go to what she calls the other world, which is referring to the fantasy land that she believes her alter ego is from, but it's definitely conveyed in this film that her means of reaching that place is in the form of suicide. Now, Japan has been in the top 10 countries for suicide rates in the world for decades, and for many years they were number 2 only to South Korea. Over the last 8 years, however, overall suicide rates have experienced a consistent decline, which sounds good at first, but it's not all good news though, as suicide rates for kids 19 years old and under has actually increased during that time. And that's an incredibly heartbreaking statistic. So the new school year begins in April and goes until summer break, which starts in late July, and that lasts about 8 weeks. So this gives kids suffering from the pains of school life a much needed break from the stress. But that month off from school apparently isn't nearly long enough, as the beginning of the second semester, which is September 1st, is known as the deadliest day for Japanese teens because it's the day when the majority of students kill themselves. Just the thought of having to return to such a toxic environment is too much for some kids that it drives them to suicide. Now, fortunately for Ryoko, although it's unfortunate that this is not the case for most students in real life, Ichiro saw in her who he really is on the inside and couldn't allow Ryoko to continue suffering alone, and actually put his secret past on full display for all to see in an effort to save her life by showing her that it's okay to be different, it's okay to be unique, and it's okay to be an individual, and that we all, to an extent, hide those quirky sides of ourselves from others for fear of ridicule. So I really enjoyed this film for the simple message of not only accepting people for their differences, but embracing them and using those differences to teach us a lot about ourselves as well. But there was another more recent anime film that I felt tackled the subject of bullying in a much more direct and aggressive manner by exploring the long-term effects of bullying, not just from the perspective of the victim, but also from the perspective of the bully, the families involved, and other bystanders and co-conspirators. And that film was Koe no Katachi, also known as A Silent Voice or The Shape of Voice. So this film was about a guy named Ishida who, along with his friends, mercilessly bullied a new deaf student named Shoko in elementary school. Now, despite her outgoing personality and wanting to befriend everyone, they would do things to her like rip her hearing aid out, which would cause her ear to bleed, throw her books into the water, along with other forms of physical bullying. So this led to the young girl being pulled from school by her mother, which led to the ringleader Ishida getting into some serious trouble, resulting in him receiving a bully label that would follow him through middle school and into high school, where he was now the social outcast, unable to even look his classmates in the eye and contemplating suicide himself. So Having now experienced the shoe being on the other foot, Ishida sets out to be a better person, even befriending a fellow outcast named Nagatsuka, who was probably my favorite character in this film. But his ultimate goal was to make amends with his former victim, even going so far as to learn sign language to better communicate with her. But this attempt at reconciliation reopens some old wounds, particularly for a girl named Naoka, who was part of the original bullying group and who tries to sabotage Ishida and Shoko's newfound friendship. And she goes about this by harassing Shoko as cruelly as she did in elementary school. And she even conveys to Shoko that Shoko is the bad person for destroying their lives as children by getting Ishida in trouble for being a bully, and that things would have been a lot better if she never came to their school all those years ago in the first place. So Shoko, being the young and impressionable person that she is, takes Naoka's words to heart and begins to hate herself despite the fact that she's the victim, and attempts to take her own life. Now, luckily, this attempt is thwarted by Ishida, who just happened to be in the right place at the right time, but it lands him in the hospital in the process. So this sequence of events culminates in everyone related to the situation from elementary school to take a really hard look at themselves, from the parents and the family of the children, to the people involved in the bullying directly, to even the friends who saw these things taking place and were either too fearful or self-centered to do anything to stop it. Now see, the effects of what looks like a typical bullying situation on the surface prove to run quite deep, and I applaud A Silent Voice for exploring them with such depth and detail. I applaud both of these films actually, Aura for its message of acceptance, and A Silent Voice for its running theme of the importance of self-love, the lack of which can lead to some potentially dire consequences, as shown with Shoko and Ishida, and especially Naoka, who was just a huge ball of hate. Now, of course, there are plenty of anime that show kids being bullied, but usually it's handled in a very blasé manner, I guess because it's so normal here, but I'm really glad to see two films place the issue front and center to spotlight just how unacceptable it is and what these kids are really going through in real life. Because honestly, 13-year-olds thinking of suicide is a huge problem, and I hope to see it addressed with a little more seriousness here in Japan, because these kids truly are suffering quietly and something just has to change. But now I want to know what you guys think. Have you seen either of these films? Did you like them? Did you hate them? Did you think that they were too sensationalized? Personally, I thought maybe there was a lot of suicidal content in these films, but after learning about these statistics of Japan's suicide rate, maybe they're not too sensationalized. But again, I want to know your thoughts, so leave them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're going through something, don't be afraid to talk to somebody. You don't have to suffer alone. I can't convey that enough, especially after seeing these films and learning about the things that these kids go through on a daily basis that they just keep to themselves and just let destroy them from the inside. I'll see you guys next time, but until then, sayonara, suckers.